Hello, and welcome to a new podcast series by the local charity, the Energy and Sustainability Centre, also known as ESC. We have crafted 5 exciting, informative and entertaining episodes to educate the island on its journey to net zero. This series is generously sponsored by Zurich on the Isle of Man. So let's get started. In today's final episode, we're joined by the charity members themselves, Ralph Peake and Adrian Cowin, both directors of ESC. Ralph and Adrian are here to wrap up the series with their insights on several pressing issues. Join us for this insightful conversation as we conclude our series with these final thoughts on the challenges and uncertainties we face in the fight against climate change.
We sometimes get tied up on the Isle of Man thinking about what I'd call the micro scale, the local climate and weather, and that's important to us for our day-to-day living and our yearly planning and that, but it's only a very, very small snapshot of what's going on. And we get tied up between the difference between weather and climate. Weather, the climate change story, it's not right for the Isle of Man or the British Isles. It can't be right because look at all the rain we've had this summer. Well, that's actually micro scale. That's weather. That's not climate. That's caused by the position of a jet stream. And that varies any time of the year from year to year. Climate is bigger than that. And indeed, it's bigger than just on the Isle of Man or the British Isles, which is only regional. It's global. And that's the idea about the big picture. And it's the big picture, what's happening to the planet, which is of more concern. And then you can come zooming back in from that, when you know about that big picture, to look at the impacts. And the impacts are global. And by that, we mean there'll be difference in different parts of the planet. Some parts of the planet, the impacts will be more severe and sooner. Other parts of the planet, it's going to take a bit more time to be noticeable that there is an impact. And you come all the way down to the microscale again, and you can observe impacts at a local level and start to link them back to the bigger picture. So it's a circle of information, and if you accept that, the wider picture, there's a greater understanding. Because at any one time, you may be in a state of denial saying it's not warmer this summer on the Isle of Man, but so what? That's only a short period of time in one place. But at the same time, there are plenty of other parts of the planet that are suffering from extreme conditions, extreme heat waves in southern Europe, South America, parts of Asia, and severe drought. They're suffering heat waves of prolonged nature, 40 degrees Celsius or more. Nobody wants that. It's unlivable. And it's not only bad for humans, it's bad for nature. And if you understand that big picture that's going on and measure it and continue to monitor those changes, you'll know what's going on with the planet. And just yesterday, as we speak, Copernicus, the European collaboration of measuring all the data sets from the planet, confirmed that the planet looks like it's had its warmest day on record yesterday, globally, not regionally, globally. So these things are happening as measured on the land, in the atmosphere and in the oceans. And this is the big concern that I have personally for our future as these changes, the rate of change to our planet is increasing, and we have to have some policy and mitigations in place to slow down the rate of change and level things off so more parts of the planet can be sustainable for food security, population security, energy security, biodiversity. The picture is huge.
So what sort of pressures do you think, Ralph, this actually puts on the sort of the infrastructure we have, not just here on the Isle of Man, but sort of globally as well, sort of networks we have? Are these things going to have to change substantially going forward?
Yeah, I think they will, as Adrian's pointed out. I think we do get confused when we're told it's the warmest month on record or the wettest month, and you think, it's not so bad today. But of course, it's built up over the evening as well. That's what I've learned since Adrian's become a director of the Energy Sustainability Centre, is his inside knowledge on this and how to put it into layman's terms. So it's not the fact you'll think, it's great, warmer day or a warmer month, but actually what that means is it's a different climate reaction. So it's the average temperatures through the night. That's what makes it a very poor situation for us going forward. So the infrastructure will have to be adapted for that. This is coming, so it's really our responsibility now to try and work out what to do on that and how to make amends for the future. So by burning less fossil fuels and using more renewable energy, we'll then reduce that harmful effect going forward. But infrastructure will have to be put in place for upgrading the grid, to use more electricity, and for predicted rises in sea levels, as well as more flooding. Those are on the way. With the wetter months of the year, it's going to have more flooding effects in rivers and rising sea temperatures.
So obviously this is going to have a cost implication. I suppose this is one of the great difficulties in that we could be talking huge amounts of money to actually do this. Is this got to be done, you think, fairly quickly and dramatically, or can we actually spread it over decades going forwards?
Well, again, the bigger picture here is it's not necessarily a cost. If we actually do these things right, it's actually going to save us money. So if we don't address them now, that's where the costs will be when we're reacting further down the line. So if we can actually get infrastructure in place that will allow us to have green energy at an affordable price, then that's good for the community. That's good for the Isle of Man. It's good for the residents here, and it's good for attracting businesses and to getting business to stay in the Isle of Man, having affordable green energy. That's what we want. By not doing that, by leaving us open to the markets of fossil fuels, gas and oil, that means then that it's going to be unpredictable costs of fuel. That's not a good thing for business, and it's not a good thing for residents when the actual cost of these things can be affected by wars around the world, by climate, by more restrictions. The price of the energy will go up and down, it fluctuates. That's not a good thing. It's much better using our natural resources here in a timely manner so we can get those affordable energy prices.
Do we have a problem, do you think, with, and we've hinted at it here, this whole uncertainty to a degree, because nothing is exact in this. It's a massive issue. It's a global issue. There's no absolute preciseness in I think the science is understood, but equally we all know that people will quote claims from 10 years back that the polar ice caps would have melted by now and such like. So is this unpredictability a real problem in actually bringing people on board with this issue?
I don't think it's unpredictable. Listen to the scientists. It's very predictable. I think the problem is for lay people like us, it's because it's happening slowly, we sort of forget and we sort of think, well, it's not actually changing. But when you look at the evidence, I mean, Adrian's produced this colourful bar chart which shows you exactly the temperatures of each year's. And you can easily see that. You can easily see the So the facts are there. It's just taking the time to look at it and keeping an open mind and realising that the facts are there and it is happening. So it is predictable, absolutely. And that's what the scientists have been telling us for 50 years, that this is happening. And the reality is backed up the predictions of the past. And so now they're even more confident of what's going to happen in the next 50 years. And maybe Adrian can explain a bit better than I can what he thinks will happen in the next 50 years.
Well, yes, Ralph. The decadal, as we call it, information is the most valuable. You measure the climate in at least decade steps. In fact, the best step to measure it in, internationally agreed, is in 30-year steps. And that's what a lot of the comparison charts now look at. And as each year goes by and each decade goes by, as that data is analysed in a slightly different way with new understanding, thanks to research in the scientific community and modelling of the way forward. Now, 10, 20, 30 years ago, the understanding and modelling of the climate was not as good as it is today. And some assumptions were made at the extremes of predictions in those simple models. That proved to be not as accurate as we would have liked. But current models have improved, and the analysis of those models is taken in a different aspect now. Rather than taking one result, you take what we call an ensemble. In other words, that's a collection of results as a way forward. And not only that, you look at what we call different scenarios, and those are based on different levels of greenhouse gas emissions, because we can't have certainty of what they're going to be in future. So the models take an input of low emission scenarios. If we've all been good and we've cut down on our fossil fuel burning, we have a median scenario, which is the one most often used as the most likely. And you have the extreme scenario if greenhouse gas emissions continue to warm our atmosphere at a greater rate than desirable as identified by the IPCC internationally. And so you have a spread of possible outcomes, but it's interesting that all the latest global model outcomes, even the lowest emission scenario, shows that the atmosphere will continue to gradually warm over the next few decades, right up to the end of the century, as will the oceans. And that's if we can cut our fossil fuel burning down today. Well, that's not going to happen. But equally, the extreme scenario is unlikely to happen. But at least there's a spread of outcomes for how our atmosphere will continue to warm, the ocean will, and the impacts from that globally and regionally. And some of them are not good reading at all.
And how much then, because again, if you listen to the naysayers, and obviously there are plenty of people who won't buy into the whole model of sort of the severe climate change, or more pertinently, I was thinking in this point, you'll sometimes hear people say, yeah, I agree there's climate change, but there's always been climate change well before mankind was on the earth to add to the mix, and so they feel it's part of a long-term natural cycle, and actually the impact of our own emissions hasn't really had a massive effect.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we hear that a lot, and I totally accept when I talk to groups and individuals about this. There's always been climate change, and there always will be, and there's always change in the natural world that's around us. It's the anthropogenic change, the man-made change on top of the natural change, which is of concern, and the man-made change is measured and observed to be greater than the natural variation. So, for instance, in any 1 year, natural variation can give you, in the oceans, for instance, a small difference of ocean warming of 0.2, or perhaps even slight cooling of the Pacific Ocean when you have La Nina and El Nino situations of 0.2 Celsius, which is relatively small. And that's the whole point. It is a change, a natural change that is small. Man-made change in the oceans is of the order of 2 Celsius. Last summer in the North Atlantic, 2 Celsius on average above the natural background change. And there were some parts of the North Atlantic which shocked oceanographers and myself when measured from satellite data, 6 Celsius last summer above the background long-term average for the North Atlantic. That's massive change that could only be attributed to the ocean warming caused by mankind because of the atmosphere-ocean mix. The atmosphere is warmer. Some of that heat energy is transferred into the oceans, and that's shocking because the natural variation is much less than that.
And is there then, do you think, a tipping point? You sometimes hear with some of the COP conferences that there's, we have a target here, as you say, we're struggling globally to get anywhere near our targets of reducing carbon emissions. Is there a tipping point, do you think, beyond which it wouldn't matter what we did, that the climate would carry on warming up regardless?
Yeah, this is of great concern, and scientists leading this at the University of Exeter. It's an international group of scientists are doing further research, but they've already identified many tipping points, and amongst the top 5, the tipping points are the ocean tipping points that we do not want, because you would have no coming back from it, really. And both North and South Atlantic tipping points caused by changes in the ocean currents. And we're one of the benefits of the ocean currents, beneficiaries, the British Isles and parts of Scandinavia. We benefit from the ocean currents that is commonly known as the Gulf Stream. Well, there's changes being measured to the Gulf Stream already. And those changes are likely to increase as you get more ice melt, freshwater ice melt from the Greenland ice shelf into the North Atlantic, which upsets that circulation, not only with temperatures, but also salinity. That the ocean currents are driven by thermally and salinity density changes. So there's one big tipping point that could happen in the next few decades that would cause a regional climate disaster. It's unpredictable. I must admit that part of it's unpredictable. It could be next year. It could be 100 years. But that's one of those unknowns that the oceanographers are trying to get to. The runaway one to me, the elephant in the room, is methane. The release of methane caused by atmospheric and cryosphere warming, ice warming around the planet. The defrosting of the permafrost will release at an unpredictable rate more methane, and methane is a much more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2. And we could end up with a tipping point where the climate has a runaway warming effect. The rate of change would be unsustainable, and the planet, or many parts of the planet, would be in trouble.
Ralph, what's your take on, again, an argument you often hear floating around on social media, which is a case of, it doesn't matter what we do here on the Isle of Man, we're wasting our money doing anything like wind turbines or any sort of net zero efforts which are going to cost, because it doesn't matter what we do here, we are so small, it's going to make no odds whatsoever globally.
Well,
you do hear that quite often, and my thought to that is really, even if we actually look at this energy security and the energy cost, those are two very good reasons to embrace the technology that's available now. Tried and tested technology. Get us onto that green renewable energy that makes it affordable, and we can then have that here on the island. We've got abundance of natural resources on the Isle of Man. We've got one of the windiest parts of the UK. We do get good sunlight, so we can use solar panels here on the island, and we've got the topography that can help us with pumped hydro and storage systems. So there's a lot of natural resources we can turn to and actually benefit from energy that's grown here for security and is affordable. That would be a great part. Even if you just put aside the fact that the Isle of Man's a small place and it may not affect the climate, if you just forget that argument, it would still give us security of energy that's affordable.
And it's security, I think, again, security and I suppose reliability is the other thing people want, and that clearly something like windmills, if you're doing wind turbines, then generally they're only going to be generating when the wind is blowing, unless you can store the power somewhere elsewhere in some sort of storage system, whether that's, I could say, hydrothermal, whether that's batteries, whatever the technology might be. But they are the two issues, I suppose, which people living, particularly on the Isle of Man here, might have major concerns about. Will a power source be reliable? And what are the cost implications going to be if we're having to invest tens of millions of pounds in doing it something? Surely it's going to show it all up.
Well, it is reliable. That's the great thing about the wind, is the wind does keep coming to the Isle of Man, and the sun does rise every day, so we do get some daylight every day. So those are predictable and those are reliable. And if we can then tie that in with some storage, then we've then got the energy stored. I mean, fossil fuels, if you remember that's just a energy store. We just burn it to release this energy. So you're just changing that energy store to one that doesn't harm the environment, doesn't harm the air quality, and then doesn't contribute to the greenhouse gases. So yes, the Isle of Man's a small place. You know, we might not change the world with what we do here, but we can certainly improve the lives of the people who live here with better air quality and affordable, secure energy.
So going forward in sort of short to medium term, so casting forward, again, Adrian was talking about 10, 20, 30-year periods for measuring the climate. If we take a similar period, 2 or 3 decades hence, how do you see, for someone like the Isle of Man, for example, will we have sort of like a hybrid model, or we'll have maybe power coming from wind turbines, some power coming maybe from solar panels? Would you still see a place for things like sort of, gas or oil turbines like we have, say, at Paul Rose?
I don't think we need to have the gas and oil in the future, because we can have a surplus of energy here on the island from green resources, from renewable. Onshore wind, onshore solar, offshore wind. That's a great mix of generation of renewable energy, and then all those items you mentioned there to store them, whether it's pumped hydro, batteries, other forms to actually store that energy. We can have all the energy we need here on the Isle of Man at an affordable cost.
What's your take on that, Adrian? Was that what sort of model would you see going forward in those sort of timeframes?
Broadly in agreement there with Ralph. I do see the need for short-term security in some form of continuity of an interconnector. Until we develop those storage solutions, some of those engineering technologies are available and reliable now, but it will take some time and investment to put them in place, whether that's battery storage, pumped hydro, for example, and there are other storage techniques available as well at a higher price point at the moment. But I'm quite excited at the opportunities for technology and engineering to continue to innovate and catch up. And I know there's a great push on that regionally and globally that will make a difference. But the sooner we can start going onto that renewable pathway, the better. The sooner we can stop using fossil fuels locally and hopefully globally, the better. And it gives time to address these issues, because after we get through the next 20 or 30 years, I'm confident that the opportunities for engineers, scientists and technologists, something else will come our way. And for the Isle of Man, that might look like at long last an efficient form of tidal and wave power as part of the hybrid model. And beyond that, I think there's a great future in nuclear technology at a smaller scale that would become at a price point we could look at. But that's going to be beyond the next 30 years, maybe as long as 50 years away. And we have to do something before that.
Just briefly, before we finish, something else you've mentioned again, obviously the change in the Gulf Stream, and also changes to global temperatures of the oceans, which again, usually global sea warming leads to rising sea levels. And here, somewhere like the Isle of Man, potentially, I suppose that has the issue of, again, it raises the issue of coastal erosion. It's always been an issue on the Isle of Man, certainly in parts of the west coast and such like. Is that something we are likely to see accelerating, do you think, in the short to medium term, looking forward 20, 30, 40, 50 years?
Yeah, there is highlights there that there's a risk of the already observed sea level rise. The rate of increase will increase as well. That's caused by increasing ice melt as one into the oceans. But as the oceans get warmer, they also expand, and that is the main contribution to sea level rise. So in terms of the global sea level rise in the last 30 years, it's of the order of 10 centimetres. The global prediction models at the current understanding and rate of rise show in that range of solutions that I mentioned for the Irish Sea area, anything between 35 centimetres of rise between now and 2070, up to a maximum of perhaps 90 centimetres of sea level rise in the same period. So the most likely for the Isle of Man, the impacts there is somewhere in the order between 40 and 60 centimetres of rise. And strangely enough, it's not a uniform rise. That it's considered that most of that rise will happen by about 2050. So our harbour areas, the infrastructure around our harbour areas will continue to need to be strengthened and defence levels raised. And some of that process has started, which is good, because that is the most predictable part of sea level rise change happening because of climate change, climate warming and ocean warming.
There will always be naysayers, there always are. I mean, that's just the nature of humanity, I guess. And some people, they could have a house on the top of Snaefell, get flooded, and they'd still say there's not an issue. Do you think we're moving forward, and this is a question to the pair of you, are we moving forward fast enough, bringing enough people on? Is the sort of the tide turning so that there's enough pressure, enough feeling amongst the vast majority of the populace that, yes, we really have to address these issues and we have to address them in the short term?
I think it's one of education, really, and I must admit, I've learned so much since working with Adrian recently. I mean, I hadn't appreciated... I was aware that the Isle of Man had these fantastic changes in tide level. We all know that, how we can see that in all the harbours around the Isle of Man. But really, it's because of where the Isle of Man is, in the Irish Sea. And I hadn't appreciated that it's the moon that drags the water into the Irish Sea, which creates so much water going into the Irish Sea and it can't get out. That's why it rises. So Adrian can explain it better than I, but it's those things that I think if people start to realise, actually, we may be a small place, but we are at the centre of something that's going on on the bigger picture of the world, and we can't move the island. We're going to have to face these things. So I think some education around this, and that's why we're trying to use Adrian's knowledge and skills to help the public understand what these natural events are and what the difference is between the man-made events and why that makes those natural events worse. So just saying that, well, the world's always had climate changes and it's been colder and it's been hotter, that's absolutely true. But man wasn't living in those times. It didn't support life in those times because it was too cold or too hot. So we don't actually want a climate like that. So why would we want to carry on doing something that is harming our near future? Not talking about thousands of years' time. The scientists are really pointing out that this is sort of decades away. So why would we not want to embrace it and to use our intelligence to actually make our future for ourselves in our lifetime, and certainly our children's lifetime, much better for them?
Any other thoughts on that one, Adrian?
I totally agree. It's an issue of the here and now. I personally feel that I'm seeing some changes already, and I know there's greater changes to come. I may see some of those if I'm still around in 2050 or beyond, but it's not so much about those of us at this age now. It's for the legacy issue for our children and grandchildren, and their prospects for living safely, securely, in a sustainable way going forward. And I don't want to think about why would they look back in historical terms and say, what were those idiots doing at the beginning of the century? Why didn't they do something sooner? Why didn't they get on with the job of mitigating the effects and impacts of climate change and slowing things down if possible, but at the very least protecting us for our future and the way forward in a sustainable way, whether that's energy or food security or population security. One of my other concerns is parts of the planet that are not sustainable because of climate change. There's an issue of mass migration, millions of people across the planet moving across the continents and putting stresses and strains on other parts of the planet. And that's another elephant in the room. And we don't want those legacy issues. If we can avoid it or at least slow down these changes, then we need to get on with things as soon as possible.